What if I told you the next great travel company may never book a single holiday? Have you ever wondered why some companies quietly become multi-baggers while everyone else is busy chasing the obvious names? Think about it. When people hear the word travel, the first names that usually come to mind are airlines, luxury hotels, or famous online travel websites. We picture airplanes taking off, families checking into resorts, or someone hurriedly booking a last-minute vacation on a mobile app. But here's a question that most investors never ask. What if the biggest opportunity in travel isn't the airline, isn't the hotel, and isn't even the website where customers book tickets? What if the real winner is the invisible company working silently behind the scenes, connecting thousands of travel businesses around the world, while millions of travelers never even hear its name? That's where today's story begins. Welcome to another episode of Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story, and every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Imagine walking into a busy airport. Thousands of passengers are rushing toward different gates. Some are traveling for business. Some are going on their honeymoon. Some are finally taking the vacation they had postponed for years. From the outside, it looks like airlines are running the show. But now imagine something else. Every travel agent in that airport suddenly loses access to flight inventories. Hotels disappear from their booking screens. Tour packages cannot be confirmed. Car rentals stop responding. Foreign travel insurance cannot be issued. Within minutes, the entire ecosystem begins slowing down. Not because airplanes stopped flying. Not because hotels closed. But because the invisible digital bridge connecting everyone suddenly disappeared. That invisible bridge is where TBO Tek operates. And that's why TBO Tek isn't simply another travel company. It is closer to being the digital plumbing of the global travel industry. Just like electricity inside a building, you rarely notice it until it disappears. Our brains naturally notice what we can see. We admire the airplane. We admire the luxury hotel. We admire the travel influencer posting breathtaking videos from Switzerland. But almost nobody admires the software quietly working in the background. Psychologists call this visibility bias. We often believe that the most visible company must also be the most valuable. History repeatedly proves otherwise. When you order food online, the restaurant gets the attention. Yet technology platforms often create enormous value by connecting buyers and sellers. When you watch a movie online, you remember the actor. You rarely think about the cloud infrastructure delivering that movie to your screen. The same principle applies here. TBO Tek isn't selling holidays. It is helping thousands of businesses sell holidays. And sometimes, the company selling the shovels earns more consistently than the people digging for gold. This idea comes from one of investing's oldest mental models. Sell the picks and shovels. During a gold rush, thousands of miners dream of striking gold. Most never do. But the merchants selling shovels, boots, ropes, and tools often make money regardless of who actually finds gold. In investing, businesses that enable an entire industry can sometimes enjoy more stable economics than businesses directly competing within it. TBO Tek follows a similar philosophy. Instead of competing with every travel company, it builds the marketplace where many of those travel companies meet. Now let me ask you another question. If global travel keeps growing over the next 10 years, who benefits? The airline? Maybe. The hotel? Probably. The travel agency? Possibly. But what about the technology platform connecting all of them? Every additional booking flowing through that platform can strengthen the business without requiring it to own a single airplane or build a single hotel. That's a completely different way of thinking. Instead of owning expensive assets, the company owns relationships. Instead of constructing buildings, it builds digital highways. Instead of managing passengers, it manages information. This is what investors call an asset-light business model. That phrase sounds complicated, but here's a simple picture. Imagine two shopkeepers. The first spends crores buying land, constructing a showroom, purchasing inventory, and maintaining warehouse. The second owns almost nothing except a powerful software platform that connects buyers and sellers. Both earn money, but one needs huge investments every time the business grows. The other can often grow much faster with comparatively less physical investment. That's the beauty of an asset-light business. Growth doesn't always require proportionately larger factories. Sometimes it simply requires more users joining the platform. But here's where investing becomes interesting. A wonderful business doesn't automatically become a wonderful investment. That's one of the hardest lessons every investor eventually learns. Imagine discovering the world's best restaurant. The food is incredible. Customers line up outside every evening. Would you blindly buy the restaurant if someone asked for 10 times its real worth? Probably not. Business quality and investment quality are related. But they are not identical twins. One answers, "Is this a great company?" The other asks, "Am I paying a sensible price for that greatness?" And that's exactly the question we'll keep returning to throughout this journey. Over the next few chapters, we're going to uncover something much deeper than quarterly profits or stock charts. We'll understand why travel technology is changing, why businesses like TBO are attracting increasing attention, why management decisions matter more than headlines, why market psychology often confuses price with value, why technical behavior sometimes reveals changing investor conviction before financial statements fully reflect it. And perhaps the biggest question of all, can a company be expensive and still become a rewarding investment? Or does paying too much, even for an excellent business, eventually become a costly mistake? That is the mystery we'll solve together. Because investing isn't about predicting tomorrow's stock price. It's about understanding today's business deeply enough that tomorrow's price fluctuations stop controlling your emotions. And TBO Tek offers one of the most fascinating case studies for exactly that lesson. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories. Stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. Stay with me, because the next chapter doesn't begin with TBO Tek. It begins with something much bigger, the future of global travel itself. And trust me, without understanding that story, you can never truly understand this one. Before we move on, I'm curious about something. As this story unfolds chapter by chapter, notice which idea stays with you long after you've finished listening. By the end of the journey, tell me which chapter made you think differently about investing, and if there was a chapter that could have been even stronger. Sometimes the best stories are improved, not just by the storyteller, but by the people who experience them. Chapter 2. The industry. The billion-dollar highway that most investors never notice. Have you ever stood on the side of a busy highway? Cars keep passing. Trucks keep moving. Buses arrive one after another. Some vehicles are carrying vegetables. Some are carrying medicines. Some are carrying expensive electronics. Now here's an interesting question. If someone asked you to invest, would you rather own one truck or the highway that every truck must use? Pause for a moment and think about it. Because that's exactly the difference between investing in an individual travel business and investing in the digital infrastructure that connects the entire travel ecosystem. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story, and every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. When people hear the word travel industry, they usually imagine vacations, beautiful beaches, luxury hotels, airplanes, suitcases, holiday photographs. But that's only what the customer sees. The travel industry is much bigger than tourism. It is one of the world's largest service ecosystems. Every time someone books a flight, a hotel, a visa, airport transfers, travel insurance, holiday packages, or even a guided city tour, hundreds of systems quietly begin talking to each other. Imagine organizing a wedding. You need a venue, a caterer, a photographer, a decorator, music, transportation, accommodation. If every service provider had to call every other provider separately, the wedding would become chaos. Instead, imagine one organizer connecting everyone. That's what makes the entire event possible. The travel industry works almost the same way. Thousands of airlines, millions of hotel rooms, thousands of travel agencies, different currencies, different tax rules, different languages, different countries. Someone has to connect all of them. That someone increasingly isn't a person. It's technology. Now let's understand something investors often hear but rarely visualize. TAM. The phrase sounds intimidating. TAM means total addressable market. Forget the complicated words. Imagine opening a tea stall. If your shop is inside one small village, your customers are limited. Even if every single villager buys your tea, there's a natural ceiling to your business. Now imagine opening the same shop inside a busy railway station. Suddenly, thousands of people walk past every day. Your business hasn't become smarter overnight. Your market has simply become much larger. That's TAM. It answers one simple question. How big can this business become if everything goes right? Now think about global travel. Every year, millions of flights, billions of hotel bookings, business travel, medical tourism, religious tourism, education abroad, destination weddings, luxury holidays, backpacking, corporate conferences, sporting events, cruise vacations. Each of these creates transactions. Each transaction creates information. Each piece of information needs to travel safely between buyers and sellers. That means the opportunity isn't limited to today's travel demand. As more people travel, more businesses need better technology. And that's why many investors believe the runway for travel technology is still long. Not because hotels are suddenly becoming more luxurious, but because the world is becoming more connected. There's another mental model that explains why this matters. It's called the rising tide. Imagine hundreds of boats floating in the sea. When the tide rises, most boats rise with it. Some rise faster, some slower, but almost all benefit. That's what economists call a tailwind. A tailwind is simply a force pushing businesses forward without the company having to create it. Today, several powerful tailwinds are quietly helping travel technology companies. People are traveling more after years of disruption. Middle-class incomes continue improving in many developing countries. International tourism is expanding. Digital payments are becoming easier. Visas are increasingly processed online. Travel agents themselves are moving from phone calls and paperwork to digital platforms. Technology adoption is accelerating. Every one of these trends pushes the industry forward. Notice something interesting. None of these trends belongs exclusively to one company. They're changing the entire landscape. The best businesses simply ride those waves more efficiently than everyone else. But every story has another side. If tailwinds exist, headwinds always exist too. Think about riding a bicycle. When the wind is behind you, pedaling feels effortless. When the wind blows directly into your face, suddenly the same road feels much harder. Businesses experience the same thing. Travel is among the first industries to feel global uncertainty. Economic slowdowns, wars, pandemics, currency fluctuations, oil prices, visa restrictions, natural disasters. These events can reduce travel demand almost overnight. Unlike food or electricity, travel isn't always essential. Many people postpone vacations during uncertain times. That means travel businesses must constantly adapt. The strongest companies aren't the ones that never face storms. They're the ones that continue moving forward despite them. Now here's where TBO's story becomes fascinating. Instead of betting on one airline or one hotel chain, it participates across thousands of them. Think about owning a shopping mall. You don't depend on one clothing store succeeding. You earn because many shops operate under one roof. If one restaurant struggles, another may thrive. The mall continues attracting visitors. Similarly, TBO benefits from activity happening across a broad travel ecosystem rather than relying on a single travel brand. This doesn't eliminate risk, but it spreads it. And spreading risk is one of the oldest principles in investing. Now let's explore another idea that quietly creates enormous wealth. It's called the network effect. The name sounds technical. The reality is beautifully simple. Imagine you're the first person to buy a telephone. It's useless. There's nobody to call. Now imagine 2 people own telephones. Slightly better. Now imagine 1 million people own telephones. Suddenly, every new user makes the entire network more valuable. Social media works this way. Payment apps work this way. Online marketplaces work this way. The more participants join, the stronger the network becomes. Travel technology follows the same principle. More hotels attract more travel agents. More travel agents attract more hotels. More airlines attract more buyers. More buyers encourage more suppliers. Each new participant increases the usefulness of the platform for everyone else. This creates a flywheel. A flywheel is another mental model. Picture an enormous iron wheel. At first, pushing it is exhausting. It barely moves. But every push adds a little momentum. Eventually, the wheel begins turning almost by itself. Businesses with strong network effects often behave like that. Growth becomes easier because yesterday's customers help attract tomorrow's customers. That's why investors pay close attention to platform businesses. Not because they're fashionable, but because successful networks often become stronger as they grow. There's another fascinating mental model hidden here. It's called second-order thinking. Most people think, more people traveling means airlines will earn more. That's first-order thinking. Second-order thinking asks, if every airline grows, who benefits from helping all airlines grow? That's a much deeper question. Instead of looking at the obvious winner, it searches for the business quietly standing behind every winner. Sometimes the biggest opportunity isn't where the spotlight shines. It's where the spotlight gets its electricity. Now ask yourself this. If global travel doubles over the next decade, will the need for technology become smaller or larger? Will travel agents suddenly abandon digital systems? Will hotels go back to fax machines? Will airlines stop using automated distribution? Probably not. Technology isn't replacing travel. Technology is becoming travel's nervous system. And that's why investors increasingly look beyond airlines and hotels to the digital infrastructure supporting them. But remember what we discussed in the previous chapter. A wonderful industry doesn't automatically create wonderful investments. History is full of industries with enormous potential where investors still lost money because they paid unrealistic prices or backed the wrong businesses. That's why understanding the industry is only the beginning. The real challenge is identifying which company has the strongest combination of business quality, sensible expectations, improving execution, and increasing market confidence. That's exactly where our journey leads next. Because now that we understand the highway, it's finally time to examine the company building toll booths on that highway. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories. Stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. As the chapters unfold, notice how each new idea connects to the previous one. By the time we reach the end, I'd love to know which chapter stayed with you the longest, and whether there was a part of the story that you felt could have gone even deeper. Sometimes the most valuable insights come from the conversations that begin after the story ends. Chapter 3. Understanding TBO's business. The company that doesn't sell travel, yet earns every time someone travels. Imagine you own a busy shopping mall. Every morning, thousands of people walk through its doors. Some visit a clothing store. Some buy groceries. Some watch a movie. Some have dinner with their families. Now let me ask you something. Does the owner of the mall need every customer to buy from the same shop? Not at all. In fact, the mall owner becomes richer simply because transactions keep happening inside the ecosystem. Whether one customer buys shoes, another buys coffee, and someone else watches a movie, The mall continues earning because it created the place where everyone meets. Now keep that picture in your mind. Because once you understand the economics of a shopping mall, you've already understood the heart of TBO Tech's business. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story. And every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Most people still think TBO Tek is a travel company. That's only partially true. A better way to describe it is this. TBO Tek is a technology company serving the travel industry. And that single difference changes almost everything. Think about what happens when a local travel agent receives a customer asking, "Can you book me a hotel in Paris, a flight from Delhi, airport pickup, travel insurance, and a sightseeing package?" The customer expects an answer within minutes. But where does the travel agent find all that information? Should the agent call every hotel individually? Every airline separately? Every sightseeing company one after another? That would be impossible. Instead, the travel agent opens one platform, searches once, compares thousands of options, books instantly. Behind that seemingly simple process is a highly sophisticated digital marketplace. That marketplace is where TBO quietly operates. It doesn't create the hotel room. It doesn't fly the airplane. It doesn't organize the sightseeing tour. Instead, it makes the entire booking process possible. That's why understanding TBO requires changing one mental model. It isn't selling products. It is reducing friction. Now here's another interesting question. Why do people willingly pay toll tax on a highway? Because the highway saves time. It reduces effort. It creates convenience. Nobody pays because they enjoy paying tolls. They pay because the road is valuable. Technology platforms work the same way. Businesses don't use TBO because software is exciting. They use it because it saves time. It reduces errors. It gives access to global inventory. It simplifies an incredibly complicated business. Economists often describe this as reducing transaction costs. That sounds like textbook language. Let's make it simple. Imagine buying vegetables from 20 different farmers every morning. Each farmer charges differently. Each has different quality, different delivery times, different payment methods. Managing all those relationships becomes exhausting. Now imagine one wholesale market where every farmer comes together. Suddenly your job becomes much easier. The vegetables haven't changed. The marketplace has. That's exactly what technology platforms do. They organize chaos. And businesses happily pay for that convenience. This brings us to another fascinating idea. Platform economics. Imagine two businesses. The first is a traditional hotel. If it wants to double its business, it probably needs another building, more rooms, more staff, more furniture, more maintenance. Everything doubles. Now imagine a software platform. When the next 1,000 customers arrive, it doesn't necessarily need another building. The same software simply serves more users. Of course, technology requires continuous investment in servers, engineering, cybersecurity, and product development. But unlike physical infrastructure, software often scales far more efficiently. That's why investors often become excited about platform businesses. Because as they grow, every additional transaction can contribute disproportionately to profits once the platform reaches meaningful scale. Notice something important. Growth and scalability are not the same thing. Many companies grow. Very few scale efficiently. Scaling means serving more customers without costs rising at the same speed. That's one of the hidden engines behind successful platform businesses. Now let's talk about something Warren Buffett often looks for. The moat. When people hear the word moat, they imagine castles surrounded by water. Exactly. Centuries ago, kings built moats to make castles difficult to attack. Investing borrowed the same idea. A business moat is simply anything that makes competition difficult. But here's something beginners often misunderstand. A moat isn't always a patent or a famous brand. Sometimes the moat is relationships. Sometimes it's data. Sometimes it's trust. Sometimes it's scale. And sometimes it's all of them working together. Think about your favorite messaging app. Could another company build a similar app tomorrow? Probably yes. Then why don't you switch? Because all your friends are already on the current platform. The technology isn't the moat. The network is. Similarly, if thousands of travel agents are already trained on one platform, suppliers have integrated their systems, payment processes are established, and years of relationships have been built, switching becomes much harder than simply downloading another piece of software. This is called switching cost. Not because changing is impossible, but because changing becomes inconvenient. And convenience is surprisingly valuable in business. Now let me introduce another mental model. The flywheel. Imagine pushing an enormous iron wheel. The first push feels useless. Nothing happens. The second push is equally frustrating. The third push barely moves it. Most people quit here. But someone keeps pushing. Gradually, the wheel starts rotating. Once enough momentum builds, the wheel almost pulls itself forward. Businesses can work exactly the same way. In TBO's case, more hotels attract more travel agents. More travel agents bring more bookings. More bookings encourage additional hotels to join. Better inventory attracts even more customers. Higher transaction volumes generate more cash. That cash is reinvested into technology. Better technology attracts even more users. The cycle repeats. This is no longer ordinary growth. It becomes self-reinforcing growth. That's why investors love businesses with powerful flywheels. Success creates conditions for even more success. There's another mental model that explains why companies like TBO can become stronger over time. It's called the snowball effect. Imagine making a tiny snowball. At first, it fits comfortably in your hand. Roll it downhill. As it rolls, more snow sticks to it. Now it's larger. Because it's larger, it collects even more snow. Eventually, a snowball that started in your palm becomes enormous. Businesses with strong customer relationships often behave exactly like this. Every new customer doesn't just add revenue. That customer can attract suppliers. Suppliers attract additional customers. Those customers generate more data. More data improves the platform. The improved platform attracts even more participants. Growth compounds, not because of luck, but because the system itself becomes stronger. Now here's another question worth asking. If building a travel platform is so attractive, why doesn't every company simply build one? That's where another mental model appears. The iceberg principle. When you look at an iceberg, you only see a small portion above water. Almost everything lies hidden underneath. TBO's visible product is its booking platform. But beneath the surface lies years of technology development. Global supplier integrations, relationships with airlines, hotel partnerships, payment systems, compliance across multiple countries, foreign currency capabilities, customer support infrastructure, data management, security, and operational experience. Anyone can copy what is visible. Very few can replicate what remains hidden beneath the surface. That's often where real competitive advantage lies. There's another principle Charlie Munger frequently discussed. The Lollapalooza effect. It happens when several positive forces work together at the same time. Think about TBO. Growing travel demand, increasing digital adoption, network effects, asset-light economics, international expansion, technology becoming central to distribution, institutional confidence. Each one alone is useful. Together, they become far more powerful, like several rivers joining to create one mighty current. That's when extraordinary businesses begin separating themselves from ordinary ones. But remember, every strength has a mirror image. Platform businesses also carry responsibilities. Technology must continuously improve. Cybersecurity must remain robust. Competition never sleeps. Customers expect faster systems every year. International regulations evolve. Trust must be earned repeatedly. One major disruption can damage years of reputation. That's why management quality matters so much. Building a platform is difficult. Protecting it is even harder. Now think back to the shopping mall from the beginning of this chapter. If more stores keep opening, more customers arrive. As more customers arrive, new stores become interested. The mall becomes increasingly valuable without selling a single product itself. That's remarkably similar to how TBO creates value. It isn't trying to become the world's biggest airline or the largest hotel chain. Its ambition is different. It wants to become one of the most important digital marketplaces where global travel businesses connect. And that's a fundamentally different business model. So here's a thought to carry into the next chapter. If you've understood the business, the next question naturally follows. Can management convert this wonderful business model into wonderful financial numbers? Because stories inspire investors. But eventually, cash flows, profits, capital allocation, and disciplined execution decide whether a story becomes a long-term compounder. And that's exactly where we're headed next. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories. Stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. As this journey continues, keep asking yourself one simple question after every chapter. Did this story change the way I look at businesses? By the time we reach the final chapter, I'd love to hear which part reshaped your thinking the most, and which part you believe still has room to grow. Sometimes the best investment ideas are refined the same way great stories are, through thoughtful reflection. Chapter 4. The Financial Story. When numbers begin talking, can you hear the business behind them? Imagine you're about to buy a beautiful house. From the outside, everything looks perfect. Fresh paint, elegant interiors, a well-maintained garden. The owner proudly says, "This is the best house in the neighborhood." Now let me ask you something. Would you buy it without checking the foundation? Without knowing whether the roof leaks during the rainy season? Without finding out if the owner has borrowed heavily just to make the house look attractive? Probably not. Because experienced buyers know something that beginners often forget. The beauty of a house is visible. Its strength is hidden. Investing works exactly the same way. The stock price is the paint. The financial statements are the foundation. And today, we are finally walking into the basement of TBO Tek's business. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story. And every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Most beginners think revenue is the most important number in a company's annual report. After all, revenue tells us how much business the company is doing. And that's true. But let me tell you a small story. Imagine two shopkeepers. The first sells vegetables worth 1 lakh rupees every day. The second sells luxury watches worth 50,000 rupees every day. Who is doing better? You don't know. Because sales alone don't tell you whether either shopkeeper is actually making money. Revenue is like the number of people entering a restaurant. Profit tells us whether the restaurant owner is smiling when the customers leave. That's the difference. Revenue measures activity. Profit measures success. Now look at TBO's story. Only a few years ago, its annual revenue was a fraction of what it is today. Year after year, those numbers kept climbing. Not slowly, but rapidly. Imagine planting a mango tree. The first year, it gives almost no fruit. The second year, a little more. After several years, suddenly the tree begins producing baskets of mangoes. Growth businesses often behave like that. For TBO, every new travel agent joining the platform, every additional hotel, every new country, every successful partnership added another branch to that tree. Eventually, those branches begin producing far more fruit than before. The important point isn't just that revenue increased. The important point is why it increased. Because rising revenue driven by stronger business model is very different from rising revenue bought through endless discounts. And that's an important lesson for every investor. Not all growth is healthy growth. Now comes profit. Imagine filling a bucket with water. Revenue is the amount of water entering. Expenses are the holes at the bottom. Profit is the water that finally stays inside. Many companies proudly show investors enormous buckets. But if those buckets have too many holes, very little water remains. TBO's profits have also grown over the years. Not perfectly, not in a straight line, but consistently enough to tell us that the business isn't merely becoming larger. It's creating economic value. That's encouraging, because businesses cannot survive forever on excitement alone. Eventually, profits must follow the story. And in TBO's case, they largely have. But now comes my favorite number. Not because television anchors discuss it. Actually, they rarely do. It's called cash flow. Let me explain. Imagine your employer says, "Congratulations. This month your salary is 1 lakh rupees. You become excited. Then your employer adds, "We'll pay you after 2 years." Suddenly, that impressive salary doesn't feel so impressive anymore. That's the difference between accounting profit and cash flow. Profit says, "You earned the money." Cash flow asks, "Did the money actually arrive?" This is why experienced investors always follow cash. Because businesses don't pay salaries with accounting entries. They pay salaries with cash. They don't build offices with accounting profits. They build them with cash. And they don't survive recessions because profits look good on paper. They survive because cash keeps flowing into the bank. Now here's something worth watching in TBO. While profits remain healthy, cash flow has recently become less impressive than investors would ideally like. That doesn't automatically mean something is wrong. Fast-growing companies often invest aggressively. Working capital changes. Acquisitions happen. Expansion consumes cash. But it does tell us one thing. This is an area investors should continue monitoring rather than assuming everything will automatically improve. Good investors don't panic. They observe. That brings us to another beautiful mental model. Imagine a river. A healthy business isn't a pond storing water. It's a river. Money should continuously flow in, flow through, and flow out productively. If the river suddenly stops moving, something deserves attention. Cash flow is simply the speed of that river. Now let's discuss something that sounds complicated, but answers an incredibly simple question. Return on equity, or ROE. Imagine you and your friend each receive 100 rupees. You start a lemonade stand. Your friend opens another lemonade stand. At the end of the year, you earn 25 rupees. Your friend earns 8. Who used the original money more efficiently? Obviously you did. That's all ROE measures. It asks, how effectively does management convert shareholders' money into profits? Notice something beautiful. ROE isn't just judging the business. It's judging management. Because shareholders provide capital. Management decides what to do with it. Over the last several years, TBO has demonstrated healthy returns on equity. Although recent expansion has moderated those returns somewhat, they still suggest that management has generally been effective in creating profits from shareholders' capital. But ROE has an older, wiser cousin. ROEs, return on capital employed. Imagine two chefs. One earns 20 lakh rupees using a tiny kitchen. The other earns the same amount after building a palace-sized restaurant. Who is actually more efficient? Probably the first chef. ROEs doesn't just ask how much profit was made. It asks how much capital was required to make it. Think of it as a fuel efficiency rating for businesses. Two cars reach the same destination. One consumes twice the fuel. ROEs helps investors identify which company is traveling farther with fewer resources. Historically, TBO has delivered attractive ROEs numbers, although recent investments and expansion have reduced them from earlier highs. That isn't necessarily negative. Sometimes companies accept temporarily lower returns while investing for a much larger future opportunity. The key question is whether those investments begin generating higher returns over the coming years. Now let me tell you something almost nobody outside finance discusses. Working capital. Imagine owning a grocery shop. Customers pay you immediately, but your suppliers allow you to pay after 30 days. Think about what just happened. You received money before you had to spend it. Wouldn't every business love that? Working capital simply measures how money moves through the business. Some companies pay first and receive cash much later. Others receive cash first and pay suppliers later. The second situation is generally more comfortable. It's like being paid your salary on the first day of the month while your rent is due at the end. TBO's business has historically benefited from favorable working capital dynamics because of the nature of travel transactions. However, investors should also keep an eye on receivables, which remain elevated, to ensure cash conversion stays healthy as the business expands. Now comes debt. Debt is one of the most misunderstood words in investing. Some investors believe debt is always dangerous. Others believe it doesn't matter. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. Imagine borrowing money to buy a taxi. If that taxi earns enough every month to comfortably repay the loan, the debt helped create wealth. Now imagine borrowing the same money to buy expensive jewelry that earns nothing. The same debt becomes a burden. Debt isn't good or bad by itself. Its usefulness depends on what management does with it. In TBO's case, borrowings have increased compared with earlier years. That deserves attention. But equally important, the company continues earning enough to comfortably service those borrowings. So the question isn't, does debt exist? The real question is management creating enough value from the borrowed money? That answer will become clearer over the next few years. This brings us to one of Charlie Munger's favorite ideas: inversion. Instead of asking, what makes a great business? Ask, what destroys great businesses? Usually the answers are surprisingly similar. Running out of cash, poor capital allocation, uncontrolled debt, weak profitability, declining returns. Ignoring these warning signs. Notice something interesting. When we analyze TBO's financial statements, we're not trying to predict tomorrow's share price. We're simply asking whether any of those warning signs are becoming stronger. So far, the business still appears financially healthy. But like every growing company, it deserves continuous monitoring rather than blind admiration. There's one final mental model I'd like you to remember. Imagine a doctor. A single blood test rarely tells the whole story. Instead, the doctor studies blood pressure, heart rate, sugar, cholesterol, weight, medical history. Only then does the diagnosis become meaningful. Financial analysis works exactly the same way. Revenue alone can mislead. Profit alone can mislead. Cash flow alone can mislead. ROE alone can mislead. Debt alone can mislead. But when all these numbers begin telling the same story, investors gain confidence. And that's precisely what makes financial analysis so fascinating. Individual numbers whisper. Together, they tell a story. So here's a question to carry into the next chapter. If the financial engine looks healthy, how much should an investor actually be willing to pay for it? Because even the strongest engine can become a poor investment if someone asks an unreasonable price for the car. And that's where one of investing's greatest debates begins. Value versus quality. Can an excellent business still become a bad investment because it's too expensive? Or can extraordinary businesses justify extraordinary prices? That's the mystery we'll unravel next. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories, stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. As we move into the next chapter, keep one thought in the back of your mind. Were you listening to numbers? Or were you listening to the story those numbers were trying to tell? When the journey is complete, I'd love to know which chapter transformed raw data into understanding for you, and which one you think could have uncovered an even deeper layer of the story. Chapter 5. Valuation. A great company. But is it worth the price? Imagine you're standing outside a luxury car showroom. On one side stands a brand new Rolls-Royce. On the other side stands a 10-year-old family sedan. Now let me ask you a simple question. Which one is the better purchase? Most people immediately point toward the Rolls-Royce. But think carefully. What if the Rolls-Royce costs 50 crore rupees and the sedan costs 3 lakh rupees? Suddenly, the question changes. You're no longer comparing cars. You're comparing price versus value. And that's exactly where investing becomes fascinating. Because the stock market doesn't reward investors simply for buying great companies. It rewards investors for buying great companies at sensible expectations. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story. And every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Think about your favorite restaurant. Imagine everyone in your city suddenly discovers it. The food hasn't changed. The chef hasn't changed. The building hasn't changed. Only one thing changes. Everyone wants a table. Soon people begin paying double, then triple, just to reserve a seat. Now ask yourself, did the restaurant become twice as good overnight? Of course not. Only expectations changed. That's exactly what valuation measures. It isn't trying to answer, is this a good business? It asks a completely different question. How much optimism has already been priced into this business? And surprisingly, those are two very different questions. Let's begin with the most famous valuation tool, price-to-earnings ratio, or simply, PE. People often describe PE as expensive or cheap. But that's not what it really measures. Imagine buying a mango tree. If the tree earns you 1,000 rupees every year, and someone asks 20,000 rupees for it, you're paying 20 years worth of current earnings. That's all PE really says. How many years of today's earnings are investors willing to pay for? Now think about TBO Tek. Its PE is much higher than many companies in its industry. Does that automatically mean it's overpriced? Not necessarily. Imagine two students. One consistently scores 95%. The other scores 65. Would you pay more to hire the better student? Probably yes. Similarly, markets often pay higher multiples for businesses expected to grow faster. A high pay doesn't always mean a stock is expensive. Sometimes it simply means investors expect extraordinary things. The real question isn't whether the pay is high. The real question is, can the company justify those expectations? That naturally leads us to another ratio. PEG. Most investors stop after looking at pay. Smarter investors ask, how fast are earnings growing? Imagine two mango trees. One grows one new branch every year. The other grows 10. Would you value them equally? Probably not. PEG simply connects price with growth. Think of it as asking, am I paying extra for something that's genuinely growing faster? TBO's PEG tells an interesting story. Yes, the market is paying a premium, but investors are also expecting continued high earnings growth. This shifts the debate. The question is no longer, is the stock expensive? The question becomes, can management continue delivering growth strong enough to justify today's premium? That's a much better question. Now let's discuss a ratio many beginners love. Price to book value. Imagine two businesses. The first owns hotels, land, office buildings, aircraft. The second owns software, customer relationships, technology, and data. If you simply compare the value of physical assets, the second business will often appear expensive. Why? Because its greatest assets don't sit inside buildings. They sit inside people's minds. Software, brand, relationships, technology, network, trust. These are difficult to measure on a balance sheet. Think about WhatsApp. Its real value isn't the computers sitting inside offices. Its value lies in billions of connected users. Platform businesses often look expensive on price to book because their competitive advantage isn't made of concrete and steel. TBO falls into that category. Judging it purely by book value is like judging a best-selling novel by the price of the paper it was printed on. The paper isn't what people are buying. They're buying the ideas inside. Now comes a favorite among institutional investors: EV/EBITDA. The name sounds frightening. Let's simplify it. Imagine you're buying an apartment. One costs 1 crore rupees. The other costs 90 lakh rupees. The cheaper apartment seems like the obvious choice. Then you discover the second apartment has unpaid maintenance bills, pending legal disputes, and a massive housing loan attached to it. Suddenly, the cheaper apartment isn't really cheaper. Enterprise value works similarly. It asks, what is the true cost of buying the entire business, including its financial obligations? EBITDA then asks, how much operating profit does this business generate before financing and accounting adjustments? Institutional investors like this measure because it allows them to compare businesses with different capital structures. For companies expanding through acquisitions and global operations, it often provides a clearer picture than looking at profits alone. Now let's enter the world of imagination. Because valuation isn't only about today's numbers, it's about tomorrow. That brings us to one of investing's most respected tools: discounted cash flow, or DCF. Imagine your grandfather promises to give you 1 lakh rupees. Would you rather receive it today or 10 years later? Most people would choose today. Why? Because money available today can be invested and grow. This is called the time value of money. DCF simply estimates all the cash a business might generate in the future and asks, what is all that future cash worth today? Now here's something important. DCF isn't a prediction machine. It's a thinking machine. If you make overly optimistic assumptions, DCF will happily tell you almost any company is cheap. If you're too pessimistic, it will tell you every stock is expensive. That's why experienced investors don't worship DCF. They use it to test assumptions. Now comes my favorite valuation framework, one that's surprisingly underused: reverse DCF. Instead of asking, what is this company worth? It asks something much smarter. What growth must this company achieve for today's price to make sense? Imagine someone offers you a small grocery shop for 100 crore rupees. Instead of arguing about the price, you ask, how much profit would this shop need to earn every year for this purchase to be reasonable? That's reverse DCF. It works backwards. Applied to TBO, the message becomes fascinating. The market isn't merely rewarding past performance. It is already expecting many years of strong execution. That doesn't make the investment bad. It simply raises the standard management must continue meeting. The higher the expectations, the smaller the room for disappointment. This brings us to something I like calling the expectations quotient. Imagine two students. The first scores 98 marks. Everyone expected 98. Nobody celebrates. The second scores 85. Everyone expected 60. Suddenly, the entire school applauds. Notice something interesting. Performance didn't create excitement. Performance relative to expectations did. The stock market behaves exactly the same way. Stocks don't move only because companies perform well. They move because companies perform better or worse than what investors were already expecting. This is why outstanding businesses sometimes fall after reporting excellent results. Not because the results were bad, because expectations were even higher. TBO currently lives in this world. Investors already believe it's an exceptional business. Management now has to keep proving them right. Now let's revisit one of investing's oldest debates: value versus quality. Imagine two watches. One costs 500 rupees. The other costs 50,000. If the expensive watch lasts 30 years, never fails, and becomes an heirloom, was it actually expensive? Sometimes, cheap becomes expensive, and expensive becomes cheap. The same applies to businesses. Many investors chase low-pay stocks believing they're bargains. But a low valuation often reflects low growth, poor management, or weak competitive advantages. On the other hand, High-quality businesses frequently appear expensive because the market recognizes their strengths. The real goal isn't buying the cheapest company. It's buying the company where quality is improving faster than expectations are rising. That's a completely different way of thinking. Now imagine drawing two lines on a sheet of paper. One line represents growth. The other represents valuation. This creates four different worlds. The first contains businesses with slow growth and expensive valuations. These are usually risky. The second contains slow growth and low valuations. Sometimes they're bargains. Sometimes they're value traps. The third contains fast growth but extremely expensive valuations. Wonderful companies, but difficult investments if expectations become unrealistic. Then comes the fourth quadrant, the rarest one. Businesses where earnings continue improving, quality strengthens, competitive advantages deepen, market confidence increases, yet valuation remains within a range that disciplined investors can still justify. This is where long-term wealth often gets created. Notice something. The best investors aren't obsessed with buying the cheapest stock. They're obsessed with buying mispriced quality. And that's an important distinction. Now let's talk about psychology. Imagine you're standing outside a jewelry store. Yesterday, a gold necklace cost 1 lakh rupees. Today, it costs 2 lakh rupees. Many people suddenly become excited. Not because the necklace became more beautiful, because everyone else is buying. This is called social proof. Humans naturally assume crowds must know something. The stock market amplifies this behavior every day. When prices rise, confidence rises. When prices fall, fear spreads. But here's the paradox. Price is often the loudest voice in the market, while value quietly whispers in the background. Great investors learn to hear the whisper, not ignore the crowd, but refuse to follow it blindly. Charlie Munger once suggested that investing is often less about having a very high IQ and more about avoiding predictable mistakes. One of those mistakes is confusing a great business with a great investment. Another is confusing a cheap stock with a good bargain. And perhaps the biggest mistake of all is believing valuation can be understood through a single ratio. Pay tells one story. PEG tells another. Book value tells a different story. EV/EBITDA changes the perspective. DCF imagines the future. Reverse DCF questions market expectations. Quality examines durability. Growth measures opportunity. Psychology explains price. Only when all these stories begin pointing in the same direction does valuation become meaningful. So where does that leave TBO Tek? Not as a cheap stock, and not as an obviously overpriced one either. It stands in a more interesting place. A business with strong quality, powerful structural tailwinds, improving execution, growing institutional interest, a scalable platform, constructive technical behavior, but also a valuation that already reflects considerable optimism. For long-term investors, the central question isn't, is TBO cheap? It's, can this exceptional business continue exceeding the high expectations embedded in today's price? If the answer is yes, today's premium may one day look justified. If the answer is no, even a wonderful business can become a disappointing investment. That's the fine line that separates investing from simply buying good companies. In our next chapter, we'll step away from the numbers and look at the people making the decisions. Because behind every great business stands a management team, and history repeatedly shows that over long periods, capital follows character just as much as it follows capital allocation. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories, stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. As you reflect on this chapter, ask yourself one question. Did you spend more time thinking about the company's quality or its price? By the end of the series, I'd love to know which chapter changed the way you think about investing the most, and which chapter you believe could reveal an even deeper insight. Sometimes the most valuable feedback isn't about what we already know, but about the next question we're inspired to ask. Chapter 6: Management. Behind every great business, there is someone making thousands of invisible decisions. Imagine two farmers. Both receive the same piece of fertile land. Both experience the same rainfall. Both buy seeds from the same market. 5 years later, one farm is flourishing. The other is struggling. Now ask yourself, what changed? Not the land, not the weather, not the seeds. The difference was the person making decisions every single day. Businesses are no different. Financial statements tell us what happened. Management tells us why it happened. And sometimes, that difference determines whether a company becomes a decade-long wealth creator or just another forgotten stock. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story. And every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Imagine you're the captain of a massive ship. Every passenger sees only one thing: whether the ship reaches its destination. Nobody notices the hundreds of tiny decisions made every hour. Adjusting the speed, choosing a safer route, managing fuel, watching the weather, avoiding storms. Investors often make the same mistake. They only see quarterly profits. Management, however, spends every day making thousands of invisible decisions that eventually become those quarterly numbers. That's why experienced investors don't simply buy businesses. They invest in decision makers. Let's begin with something investors call management guidance. The phrase sounds technical, but it's actually very simple. Imagine a cricket captain walking into the dressing room before an important match. He says, "We're not trying to hit every ball for six. We're going to build partnerships. Stay patient. The big runs will come later." That's guidance. It isn't a promise. It isn't a guarantee. It's management explaining how they intend to play the game. Now think about TBO. If you listen carefully to what management has been communicating over recent quarters, you'll notice something interesting. They rarely speak like a company chasing short-term profits. Instead, their language consistently revolves around expansion, technology, global reach, hotels, ancillary services, platform capabilities, customer acquisition, international presence. They're essentially saying, "We are willing to invest today if it strengthens the business for the next decade." That's a very different mindset from companies trying to maximize the next quarter's earnings. Now comes one of Warren Buffett's favorite subjects: capital allocation. Most people think management's job is to increase sales. Actually, that's only part of the job. The real responsibility begins after the money arrives. Imagine your parents hand you 1 lakh rupees. You have several choices. Buy a luxury phone. Keep the money in the bank. Start a business. Invest in education. Each decision leads to a completely different future. Companies face exactly the same challenge. Every rupee they earn must answer one question: where should I go next? Expand internationally? Develop better technology? Acquire another company? Reduce debt? Build cash reserves? Reward shareholders? Management's ability to answer that question often determines long-term wealth creation. Think of capital allocation as planting seeds. A poor farmer scatters seeds randomly. A wise farmer studies the soil before planting. Over time, the difference becomes obvious. TBO's management appears to have chosen one clear path. Instead of distributing large dividends, they've largely reinvested cash into technology, expansion, and platform development. For growth investors, that's usually a positive signal. Because sometimes, the highest return comes not from distributing cash, but from reinvesting it wisely. That naturally brings us to acquisitions. Imagine building a giant jigsaw puzzle. You could slowly paint every missing piece yourself. Oh, you could buy pieces already completed. Acquisitions work similarly. Companies acquire businesses not because they enjoy spending money, but because they believe buying can sometimes be faster than building. However, there's a hidden danger. Imagine buying another person's house. The furniture looks beautiful. The walls are freshly painted. Only after moving in do you discover leaking pipes and electrical problems. Acquisitions can create the same surprise. That's why investors shouldn't celebrate every acquisition automatically. The important question isn't, did the company buy another business? The real question is, did management buy something that strengthens the platform, expands capabilities, or creates lasting value? Looking at TBO's recent journey, many of its acquisitions appear connected to international expansion, geographic reach, and strengthening its travel ecosystem. Notice the pattern. These aren't random purchases. They're pieces of a larger strategy. This leads us to another fascinating mental model, the Lego model. Imagine building a castle using Lego bricks. Every new brick should make the castle stronger. If a brick doesn't fit, the entire structure becomes unstable. Good acquisitions behave like Lego bricks. Each one should strengthen the overall business. Bad acquisitions behave like mismatched puzzle pieces. They consume money without improving the picture. Great management knows the difference. Now let's discuss something investors often avoid. Risk. Imagine driving on a beautiful highway. Clear weather, smooth roads, good music. Everything feels perfect. Do you stop wearing your seatbelt? Of course not. Because responsible drivers prepare for accidents they hope never happen. Investing requires exactly the same mindset. The strongest businesses still face risks. And intelligent investors don't ignore them simply because they're optimistic. Now think about TBO. What could challenge the business? Global travel can slow during recessions. Geopolitical tensions can reduce international tourism. Technology never stops evolving. Competition keeps improving. Currency movements affect international operations. And as the company expands globally, execution becomes more complex. None of these risks guarantee failure, but they remind us that no business is immune to uncertainty. Now I'd like to explain something many viewers may have noticed in the company's filings. The FEMA issue. At first glance, the words sound frightening. Let's simplify them. Imagine you're driving a car. One day the traffic police stop you. They ask for certain documents because they believe some paperwork might not fully comply with regulations. Notice something important. Receiving a notice doesn't automatically mean you've been found guilty. It means the authorities are asking questions. The process must run its course. That's broadly how investors should think about the FEMA matter disclosed by TBO. The company has received a regulatory notice related to certain foreign exchange compliance matters. The statutory auditors have highlighted this disclosure in their reports. But equally important, they have not modified their audit opinion because of it. In simple language, the matter exists. It deserves monitoring. But based on the disclosures available, it has not changed the auditor's overall opinion on the financial statements. Good investors avoid both extremes. They neither ignore such matters, nor assume the worst before the process concludes. They simply keep watching. Now let's talk about something that often reveals what sophisticated investors are thinking. Institutional ownership. Imagine entering a restaurant. You notice two things. Several experienced chefs from other restaurants are quietly eating there. At the same time, a few tourists who visited last month haven't returned. What conclusion would you draw? Probably not much from either fact alone. But together, they invite curiosity. Shareholding patterns work similarly. Over recent quarters, foreign institutional ownership has gradually declined. Meanwhile, domestic institutional ownership has steadily increased. Should investors panic? Not necessarily. Should investors celebrate? Not automatically. Remember, institutions also make mistakes. But changes in ownership often reveal differences in investment style rather than differences in business quality. Foreign funds frequently rebalance portfolios globally. Domestic institutions may focus more on long-term structural themes within India. The important point isn't who bought or who sold. The important question is, Why? Great investors always search for the reason, not merely the headline. This brings us to another powerful mental model, the orchestra model. Imagine attending a symphony. The violin sounds beautiful, but if the drummer ignores the rhythm, the pianist misses the notes, and the conductor loses control, the performance falls apart. A company works exactly the same way. Technology, finance, sales, compliance, risk management, human resources, legal teams, customer service, product development. Management's real job isn't playing every instrument. It's ensuring the entire orchestra performs together. That's leadership. Not doing everything yourself, but helping every talented person perform at their best. Now let's revisit corporate governance. Corporate governance is another phrase that sounds intimidating. Let's simplify it. Imagine lending your life savings to a friend. Before handing over the money, you'd probably ask 3 questions. Can I trust this person? Will they tell me the truth even when things go wrong? Will they treat my money as carefully as their own? That's corporate governance. It's simply the trust between management and shareholders. Good governance isn't proven when everything goes well. It's proven during difficult times. When challenges arise, does management disclose them? Does it explain them honestly? Does it strengthen oversight? Does it continue following sound processes? These are the questions long-term investors quietly keep asking. There's one final mental model I'd like you to remember. It's called the gardener principle. A gardener cannot force a tree to grow overnight. He waters it, protects it, removes weeds, waits patiently. Management works the same way. They cannot control stock prices. They cannot control global travel demand. They cannot control economic cycles. But they can control the quality of decisions, capital allocation, hiring, technology, innovation, customer relationships, governance. If those decisions remain disciplined, the tree usually grows, not immediately, but steadily. And that's often how extraordinary businesses are built. One good decision, repeated thousands of times. So here's the question we'll carry into our next chapter. If management is building a strong business and valuation reflects high expectations, why do stock prices still move so dramatically? Why do markets sometimes become wildly optimistic and at other times deeply pessimistic? Even when the underlying business changes very little, the answer lies not inside financial statements, but inside human psychology itself. Because markets don't move only on numbers. They move on emotions. And in the next chapter, we'll explore how technical analysis helps us understand those emotions not as a crystal ball, but as a window into collective investor behavior. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories, stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. As we continue this journey, pay attention to the moments where business decisions begin to feel more like life decisions. When you've experienced every chapter, I'd love to hear which one helped you see management through a completely different lens, and which chapter you believe could still grow stronger. After all, every great story, just like every great business, evolves through thoughtful feedback. Chapter 7, The Technical Story. When the crowd starts whispering before the headlines change. Imagine you're standing at the finish line of a marathon. Thousands of runners begin together. As the race starts, a few runners explode off the line. They're fast. They're energetic. The crowd cheers loudly. For a while, it looks impossible that anyone could catch them. But then something interesting happens. A few kilometers later, those same runners begin slowing down. Their breathing becomes heavier. Their energy fades. Meanwhile, a different group of runners quietly keeps moving. Not too fast, not too slow. They conserve energy. Their pace remains steady. One by one, they begin overtaking everyone who started too aggressively. Now let me ask you something. If you were coaching an Olympic team, would you only watch who was leading after the first kilometer? Or would you try to understand who still had strength left for the entire race? That's exactly what technical analysis tries to do. Not predict the winner, but understand who still has energy. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story, and every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Let's clear up one of the biggest misunderstandings in investing. Many people think technical analysis is about predicting tomorrow's price. If that were true, every technical analyst would already be the richest investor on earth. But that's not how it works. Technical analysis doesn't predict the future. It studies human behavior. And human behavior leaves footprints. Imagine entering a crowded shopping mall. You don't know what every customer is thinking, but you can observe where people are gathering, which stores are attracting attention, which restaurants have waiting lines, which sections everyone is quietly ignoring. Without speaking to anyone, you already understand something important about the crowd. Technical analysis works in exactly the same way. It doesn't know tomorrow's news. It observes today's behavior. Think back to our earlier discussion. Fundamental analysis asks, what is this business worth? Technical analysis asks, how are investors reacting to that business? One studies the company. The other studies the crowd. Neither is complete without the other. Imagine trying to understand a cricket match by only reading the scoreboard. You know the score, but you don't know whether the batsman looks confident, whether the bowlers are tiring, whether momentum has shifted. Technical analysis observes momentum. Fundamental analysis explains why the team deserves to win. The smartest investors usually pay attention to both. Now let me introduce another mental model. Imagine the ocean. Every wave looks different. Some are enormous. Some disappear almost instantly. But underneath those waves, the tide moves much more slowly. Experienced sailors don't make decisions based on individual waves. They study the tide. Stock markets behave exactly the same way. Daily price movements are waves. Long-term trends are tides. TBO's recent technical behavior suggests something interesting. The daily waves continue moving up and down, as they always will. But underneath those short-term fluctuations, the tide appears to be gradually changing direction. That doesn't guarantee success, but it tells us the underlying current deserves attention. Now imagine climbing a mountain. At first, every step feels difficult. The climb is steep. You frequently stop to catch your breath. Then something changes. The path becomes smoother. Your rhythm improves. You begin climbing with confidence. The mountain hasn't become smaller. You've simply found your pace. Markets often move the same way. There are periods when buyers hesitate. Every upward move quickly fades. Confidence remains fragile. Then gradually, without dramatic headlines, buyers begin returning. Not because they're excited, because they're becoming convinced. That distinction matters. Excitement creates temporary rallies. Conviction builds longer trends. Looking at TBO's recent technical story, the market appears to be shifting from excitement toward conviction. The real question isn't whether buyers have returned. The real question is whether they continue showing up. There's another mental model I'd like you to remember. Imagine a classroom. The teacher asks, who understands today's lesson? At first, only a few students raise their hands. Slowly, more hands begin going up. Eventually, almost the entire class understands. Markets behave similarly. Institutional investors rarely arrive all at once. Confidence usually spreads gradually. One participant becomes interested. Another notices improving business performance. A third observes strengthening momentum. Eventually, confidence begins reinforcing itself. This doesn't mean everyone is suddenly right. It simply means belief is spreading. Technical analysis helps us observe that change. Now let's talk about something every investor experiences. Fear. Imagine driving through heavy fog. You slow down, not because the road has become dangerous, but because you can't clearly see what's ahead. Markets often behave the same way. When uncertainty is high, buyers become cautious. Sellers become impatient. Volume dries up. Nothing dramatic happens. The market simply waits. Then imagine the fog slowly lifting. The road hasn't changed. Visibility has. Confidence returns. Cars begin accelerating again. Recent technical behavior in TBO feels similar. It's as though the market is gradually seeing farther ahead. Visibility appears to be improving. Confidence appears to be returning. But experienced drivers still keep both hands on the steering wheel. Because weather can always change. Now imagine a spring. Press it downward. Nothing happens. Press harder. Still nothing. Then suddenly, you release it. The spring doesn't move because of the final push. It moves because energy was quietly building all along. Markets sometimes behave exactly like that. Long periods of patience, quiet accumulation, limited excitement, often store energy beneath the surface. When confidence finally returns, the move can appear surprisingly strong. Many investors mistakenly believe the movement started yesterday. Experienced investors understand. The preparation began much earlier. This leads us to another fascinating mental model. The voting machine and the weighing machine. Benjamin Graham famously suggested that in the short run, the market behaves like a voting machine. People vote with emotions. Hope, fear, greed, excitement. In the long run, the market behaves like a weighing machine. Businesses are eventually judged by their true economic weight. Technical analysis helps us understand today's voting. Fundamental analysis explains tomorrow's weighing. Think about TBO. The business has continued expanding. Financial performance has improved. Management continues investing for the future. Now the market itself appears to be acknowledging that story with increasing confidence. Notice the sequence. Business first. Market recognition later. That's often how sustainable trends begin. Now let's revisit the marathon. Remember those runners conserving energy? Technical indicators are remarkably similar. They don't guarantee who wins. They simply help us observe who still has stamina. Imagine a coach watching breathing patterns, body posture, running rhythm, stride length. The coach cannot predict the exact finishing time. But the coach can often identify which athlete is likely to remain competitive. Technical indicators serve a similar purpose. They're not fortune tellers. They're health monitors. Looking at TBO today, the market seems to be suggesting that buyers have regained strength after a long period of rebuilding confidence. Momentum appears healthier. Participation appears broader. The rhythm looks more coordinated. Yet every experienced coach would say the same thing. A marathon is never won halfway through the race. Consistency matters more than one impressive sprint. Another powerful mental model is the bridge under construction. Imagine engineers building a bridge across a river. For months, people standing nearby see only pillars, steel, concrete, scaffolding. Many wonder whether the bridge will ever be completed. Then one day, the final section connects. Suddenly everyone notices. But the real work happened long before the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Markets often behave like that. By the time most investors recognize a strengthening trend, patient participants have usually been observing improvements for months. Technical analysis isn't trying to guess when the ribbon will be cut. It's trying to notice when the bridge begins connecting. Now let me tell you something that surprises many beginners. Technical analysis is not really about charts. It's about people. Every line on a chart represents someone's decision. Someone bought. Someone sold. Someone became optimistic. Someone lost confidence. Every candle tells a tiny human story. Fear, hope, regret, conviction. Repeat that thousands of times. And markets begin revealing patterns. Not because charts are magical. Because human psychology rarely changes. Technology evolves. Businesses evolve. Economies evolve. Human emotions. Not nearly as much. So where does this leave TBO? Not with certainty. Markets never offer certainty. But with something perhaps even more valuable. Evidence. Evidence that confidence has gradually improved. Evidence that buyers appear more willing to participate. Evidence that the market is beginning to align with the strengthening business story we've explored throughout this series. Could sentiment change? Absolutely. Could unexpected events alter the picture? Of course. Technical analysis is not about eliminating uncertainty. It's about recognizing when probability begins leaning in one direction without forgetting that surprises are always possible. As we prepare for the next chapter, remember something we've discovered together. A wonderful business creates value. A sensible valuation creates opportunity. Strong management builds trust. Healthy financials provide confidence. And technical behavior often tells us when the market itself begins noticing the same story. The real magic isn't choosing between fundamentals and technicals. It's understanding how they begin telling the same story at different moments in time. And that's exactly where our journey now leads. Because the next chapter isn't about indicators. It isn't about financial statements. It isn't even about management. It's about the moment when many independent clues quietly begin pointing toward the same conclusion. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories. Stories become wisdom. And wisdom helps build better investors. Before we move forward, think back to the marathon we began with. Which part of the race stayed with you? The explosive start, the patient runners, or the quiet strength that emerged later? When this entire series comes to an end, I'd love to know which chapter stayed in your mind the longest, and which one you believe still has another layer waiting to be uncovered. Sometimes the strongest investment conviction, just like the strongest stories, is built one insight at a time. Chapter 8. When the clues start pointing in the same direction. The best investors don't look for one signal. They look for a conspiracy of evidence. Imagine you're watching your favorite detective movie. A crime has just taken place. The detective arrives at the scene. He notices a single fingerprint. Interesting. But would he arrest someone immediately? Of course not. Then he discovers a footprint outside the window. Now the story becomes a little more interesting. A few hours later, CCTV footage reveals someone entering the building. Later, a neighbor reports seeing a suspicious car parked nearby. Finally, a financial transaction connects the suspect to the victim. Now think about what's happened. No single clue solved the mystery. But together, they began telling the same story. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story. And every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Now let me ask you a question. If you had to decide whether to trust someone, would you rely on just one opinion? Probably not. You'd ask friends. Observe their behavior. Listen to colleagues. Watch how they treat other people. Every independent observation adds another piece to the puzzle. Investing works exactly the same way. One financial ratio is only a clue. One chart pattern is only a clue. One good quarterly result is only a clue. One institutional investor buying shares is only a clue. None of them prove anything by themselves. But when independent clues, each collected using a different method, begin pointing toward the same business, the picture becomes clearer. Not because certainty exists, but because confidence becomes better informed. Imagine a doctor trying to diagnose a patient. The patient says, "I don't feel well." Would the doctor prescribe surgery immediately? No. First comes a blood test, then an ECG, maybe an X-ray, perhaps an MRI, blood pressure, pulse rate, medical history. Each test looks at the body from a different angle. None of them asks exactly the same question. Yet together, they help the doctor reach a better diagnosis. Notice something important. Doctors don't trust one test. Great investors don't trust one indicator either. They look for confirmation from independent sources. Now think about TBO Tek. Throughout this journey, we've looked at the company from many different windows. First, we studied the industry, a growing travel technology ecosystem, digital adoption, global expansion, long-term structural demand. That was our first clue. Then, we examined the business model, a platform connecting buyers and sellers, asset-light economics, network effects, switching costs, scalability. That became our second clue. Then came the financial story. Revenue growth, profit growth, revenue growth, profit growth, healthy returns, areas requiring monitoring like cash flow and receivables. The business wasn't perfect, but it was progressing. Another clue. Then we questioned valuation. Not asking, is it cheap? But asking, can the business justify the expectations already reflected in the market? Another clue. Then we studied management, capital allocation, expansion, governance, international strategy, long-term thinking. Another clue. Finally, we looked at market behavior itself, not to predict tomorrow, but to understand whether investors were gradually becoming more confident in the business story. Another clue. Notice something fascinating. Each chapter asked a completely different question. Yet many of the answers begin pointing toward the same company. That's not proof. It's confluence. Let me introduce another mental model. Imagine standing before a massive mountain. There are many paths to the summit. One traveler climbs from the north, another from the south, a third from the east, a fourth from the west. Each experiences different scenery, different weather, different challenges. Yet eventually, they all reach the same peak. Good investing works similarly. One investor begins with accounting. Another starts with management. A third studies industry trends. A fourth focuses on market behavior. When independent paths begin arriving at the same destination, confidence naturally increases. Not because everyone copied each other, because different roads led to the same conclusion. This idea has a beautiful scientific cousin. Scientists don't accept a discovery because one experiment worked once. They repeat it. Different laboratories repeat it. Different researchers repeat it. Different equipment repeats it. Only when independent experiments arrive at the same result does confidence grow. Notice the pattern. Truth rarely depends on one observation. It emerges from many observations agreeing with one another. Investing isn't very different. Now imagine trying to identify a genuine diamond. Would you simply look at its color? Probably not. A jeweler examines clarity, weight, cut, light reflection, certification, origin. Only after checking several independent characteristics does confidence increase. If every test confirms authenticity, the probability of making a mistake declines. Again, not certainty, probability. That's one of investing's greatest lessons. Successful investors don't chase certainty. They patiently improve probabilities. Now let's talk about something psychologists call confirmation bias. Human beings naturally love information that agrees with what they already believe. Imagine supporting your favorite cricket team. When they play well, you notice every brilliant shot. When they make mistakes, you quickly forget them. Investors behave exactly the same way. Buy a stock, and suddenly every positive article seems convincing. Every negative report feels unfair. This is dangerous. That's why independent methods matter, because each method challenges the others. If the business looks wonderful, but the financials keep deteriorating, something deserves attention. If management sounds optimistic, but capital allocation remains poor, another question arises. If financial numbers improve, yet market participation remains weak for years, perhaps investors know something worth investigating. Independent signals prevent us from falling in love with our own opinions. Here's another mental model. Imagine assembling an aircraft. Would you trust only one engineer to inspect it? Of course not. Electrical systems are inspected separately. Engines separately. Navigation separately. Hydraulics separately. Safety systems separately. Only after multiple independent checks does the aircraft receive permission to fly. Imagine if airlines said, "The engine looks fine. We don't need to inspect anything else." Nobody would board that flight. Yet investors sometimes buy companies after checking only one ratio. That's surprisingly similar. Now think back to TBO. Suppose only one thing looked attractive. Maybe revenue growth. Would that be enough? Probably not. Suppose only management sounded impressive. Still not enough. Suppose only technical behavior looked encouraging. Again, insufficient. But when business quality, industry opportunity, management execution, financial progress, market behavior, institutional interest, and long-term scalability begin strengthening together, the investment conversation changes. Not because risk disappears, but because independent evidence begins supporting the same narrative. That's a much stronger foundation than relying on one exciting headline. This leads us to one of Charlie Munger's favorite ideas, the lattice work of mental models. Imagine trying to build a bridge using only wood. Possible, but perhaps not ideal. Now imagine combining steel, concrete, engineering, mathematics, architecture, geology. Suddenly, the bridge becomes stronger because different disciplines support one another. Munger believed investing should work exactly the same way. Economics, psychology, accounting, business strategy, probability, history, human behavior. Each provides a different lens. The best decisions rarely come from mastering one subject. They come from connecting many subjects. Throughout this series, that's exactly what we've tried to do. We didn't analyze TBO only through finance, or only through charts, or only through management. We built a lattice work. And that's where conviction becomes far more durable. Now imagine you're solving a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. At first, every piece seems unrelated. Blue sky, green trees, brown buildings, white clouds. Then gradually, the pieces begin connecting. Eventually, you stop seeing individual puzzle pieces. You begin seeing the complete picture. That's exactly what happens in investing. Revenue is one piece. Profit is another. Valuation another. Management another. Technical behavior another. Institutional ownership another. Industry structure another. Only when enough pieces connect does the business begin revealing itself. So where does this leave TBO Tek? Not as a company with no risks. We've already discussed those. Not as a company guaranteed to outperform. Markets never offer guarantees. Instead, it stands as a business where multiple independent observations appear to support the same broad story. A scalable platform. A growing industry. Management investing for the future. Financials showing expansion. Market behavior becoming more constructive. Institutional participation evolving. None of these observations alone would convince a disciplined investor. Together, they create something much more valuable. Not certainty, informed conviction. And that may be one of the most important differences between speculation and investing. As we approach the final chapter, we've reached an interesting point. We understand the business, the industry, the numbers, the valuation, management, market psychology, technical behavior, independent confirmation. Now only one question remains. If you had to decide today, would you own this business? Not because someone else recommended it, not because a headline said so, but because you genuinely understand the story. That final decision is where every investor ultimately stands alone. This is story behind stocks, where businesses become stories. Stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. As this story nears its conclusion, think back to the detective we met at the beginning of this chapter. Which clue convinced you the most? Or was it only when all the clues came together that the mystery truly made sense? When you've completed the entire journey, I'd love to hear which chapter stayed with you the longest, and which one you feel still has another piece of the puzzle waiting to be discovered. Chapter 9: Market Psychology. The biggest battle in investing isn't on the stock exchange. It's inside your own mind. Imagine two people standing on the same beach, watching the same sunset. One says, "This is the most beautiful evening I've ever seen." The other says, "Looks like it's going to rain tomorrow." Neither person is lying. Both are looking at exactly the same sky. Yet both see completely different stories. Now let me ask you something. If two intelligent people can see the same sunset so differently, what do you think happens when thousands of investors look at the same stock? Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story, and every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. Throughout this series, we've studied TBO Tek from almost every possible angle. The industry, the business, the management, the financials, the valuation, the technical behavior. But now we're going to explore something even more important. The human mind. Because markets don't simply move because businesses change. Markets move because people change their opinions about businesses. And people are wonderfully irrational. Anchoring. When yesterday refuses to leave your mind. Imagine you're shopping for a laptop. The shopkeeper first shows you one costing 2 lakh rupees. You immediately think, "That's expensive." Then he shows another laptop costing 1 lakh rupees. Suddenly, the second laptop feels cheap. But stop for a moment. Did the second laptop actually become cheap? Or did your mind simply compare it with the first one? That's anchoring. Our brain loves using the first number it sees as a reference point. Investors do exactly the same thing. Some investors may anchor to the company's IPO price, others to its highest traded price, others to the price they personally bought it at. Suppose someone bought TBO much lower. Every rise feels like a gift. Someone who bought near a previous high might view the same business with frustration. Notice something fascinating. The business hasn't changed. Only the reference point inside the investor's mind has. Great investors anchor themselves to the business, not to yesterday's stock price. Second-order thinking, looking beyond the obvious. Let's return to the airport. Most people think, more people traveling means airlines will earn more. That's true. But stop there, and you've only completed half the thought. Second-order thinking asks, if every airline, hotel, and travel agency becomes busier, who quietly benefits from all of them becoming busier? That's a completely different question. Instead of following the spotlight, you're searching for the companies supplying electricity to the spotlight. TBO exists precisely in that second layer. Its success isn't tied to one hotel chain or one airline. It benefits when the ecosystem becomes more active. Second-order thinking doesn't reject obvious answers. It simply asks, and then what happens? That's where extraordinary investment ideas often hide. Circle of competence, knowing what you truly understand. Imagine asking a heart surgeon to repair an aircraft engine. Brilliant doctor. Wrong expertise. Now ask an aircraft engineer to perform heart surgery. Same problem. Neither person lacks intelligence. They're simply outside their circle of competence. Charlie Munger often reminded investors that success isn't about knowing everything. It's about honestly knowing what you don't understand. Now ask yourself, do you really understand how TBO makes money? Not just that it's a travel platform, but why travel agents use it, why suppliers join, how network effects strengthen it, how capital is allocated. If the answer is yes, then TBO may be inside your circle of competence. If not, there's nothing wrong with saying, I need to learn more before investing. Sometimes the smartest investment decision is postponing the investment. Reflexivity, when belief begins changing reality. Imagine a new restaurant. A few food bloggers praise it. More customers arrive. Because the restaurant becomes busier, people assume it must be excellent. Even more customers arrive. Banks happily offer loans. The owner opens another branch. Notice what happened. The belief itself helped create reality. George Soros called this reflexivity. Markets sometimes behave the same way. As confidence in a business increases, raising capital becomes easier. Employees become easier to attract. Partners become more willing to collaborate. Customers feel reassured. The improving perception begins strengthening the business itself. But reflexivity works both ways. If confidence collapses, raising capital becomes harder. Expansion slows. Talent leaves. The story reverses. With TBO, strong execution has gradually improved investor confidence. That confidence may create opportunities for further expansion. But management must continuously earn that confidence. Reflexivity is powerful, yet fragile. Margin of safety. Buy an umbrella before it rains. Imagine crossing a river. Would you rather cross using a bridge designed to hold exactly your weight, or one capable of carrying 10 trucks? Most people instinctively choose the stronger bridge. That's margin of safety. Benjamin Graham introduced this idea decades ago. It's simply creating room for mistakes. Now think about TBO. Its business quality is attractive, but the market already expects a great deal from it. That means the margin of safety doesn't necessarily come from buying a statistically cheap business. Instead, it comes from asking whether the company's long-term growth, management quality, and competitive advantages can justify today's expectations. The stronger the business, the smaller the margin investors sometimes accept. That makes disciplined analysis even more important. Confirmation bias, hearing only the voices we like. Imagine becoming a fan of a particular cricket player. Soon, every brilliant shot catches your attention. Every mistake gets an excuse. You begin protecting your opinion rather than testing it. Investors do exactly the same thing. After buying TBO, it's tempting to watch only optimistic interviews. Celebrate every strong quarterly result. Ignore rising borrowings. Dismiss concerns about cash flow. Or overlook valuation. Confirmation bias whispers, "You're already right." Great investors ask the opposite question. What evidence would prove me wrong? That single question protects portfolios more than dozens of technical indicators. Optionality, buying possibilities, not just present reality. Imagine purchasing a small piece of land near a growing city. Today, it's just empty land. 5 years later, a highway arrives. A metro station opens. Residential projects begin. Suddenly, the same land becomes far more valuable. Not because the land changed, because possibilities expanded. That's optionality. TBO today is much more than flights and hotel bookings. Every new geography, every additional supplier, every complementary travel service creates another possible avenue for future growth. Not every opportunity will succeed, but having multiple opportunities increases the probability that at least some become meaningful contributors over time. Inversion, start by asking how to lose. Charlie Munger loved inversion. Instead of asking, "How do I become rich?" ask, "How do I avoid becoming poor?" Let's apply that to TBO. Suppose you wanted to lose money investing in this company. How might it happen? Ignore valuation completely. Assume growth will remain extraordinary forever. Dismiss slowing cash conversion. Ignore regulatory developments. Stop reading annual reports after buying. Notice something. By asking how the investment could fail, you become a better investor. Inversion doesn't create fear. It creates preparedness. Opportunity cost, the investment you didn't make. Imagine you have enough money to buy only one fruit tree, a mango tree, or an apple tree. Choosing one automatically means giving up the other. That's opportunity cost. Every rupee invested in TBO is a rupee not invested somewhere else. Maybe another travel company. Maybe a pharmaceutical company. Maybe a bank. So the real question isn't, is TBO a good business? It's, is TBO the best use of my capital compared with other available opportunities? Professional investors think in alternatives, not absolutes. Base rates, respect history before believing exceptional stories. Imagine someone tells you, "This child will become the next Sachin Tendulkar." Could it happen? Yes. Is it likely? History suggests otherwise. That's base rates. Instead of becoming carried away by exciting stories, Look at what has happened historically. Platform businesses have produced extraordinary winners. But many have also failed because competition intensified, execution faltered, or expectations became unrealistic. TBO has demonstrated impressive growth and business quality so far. That places it among stronger businesses in its space. But base rates remind us that even excellent companies must continue executing year after year. The past creates confidence. It does not create guarantees. The chessboard mental model. Imagine a chess grandmaster. A beginner asks, "What's the next move?" The grandmaster asks, "What will happen 5 moves after that?" That's investing. The beginner sees a quarterly result. The experienced investor sees the next 5 years. The beginner sees a premium valuation. The experienced investor asks whether future cash generation can justify it. The beginner sees a price chart. The experienced investor asks what that chart reveals about changing human behavior. That's the difference between reacting and thinking. Now let's bring everything together. When we first met TBO, it looked like another travel company. Then we discovered it was actually a technology platform. Then we understood its economics, its management, its financial engine, its valuation, its technical behavior. Now we've looked at the final layer, the investor's own psychology. Because the greatest risk in investing isn't always buying the wrong company. Sometimes, it's letting the wrong emotion control the right company. Fear sells too early. Greed buys too late. Anchoring clouds judgment. Confirmation bias blinds us. Opportunity cost reminds us capital is limited. Margin of safety teaches humility. Second order thinking encourages deeper questions. Base rates demand respect for history. And inversion keeps our ego under control. Notice something remarkable. None of these mental models predict tomorrow's stock price. Instead, they improve how we think. And in investing, thinking better often matters far more than predicting better. So as we prepare for our final chapter, let me leave you with one question. If the market closed tomorrow and remained closed for the next 5 years, would you still feel comfortable owning this business? If your answer depends only on the stock price, you're thinking like a trader. If your answer depends on the quality of the business, you're beginning to think like an owner. And perhaps, that's the greatest psychological shift an investor can ever make. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories. Stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. As we approach the end of this journey, think back to every mental model we've explored. Which one changed the way you see investing? Not just TBO Tek, the most? And when the credits roll on this story, I'd love to know which chapter stayed with you long after the screen went dark, and which chapter you believe still has one more lesson waiting to be told. Chapter 10, The Final Verdict. Would you buy the story? Or would you buy the business? Imagine you're standing at a railway station. 2 trains are waiting. The first train is already crowded. Everyone seems excited. People are rushing to board. The second train is almost empty. Nobody appears interested. Now here's the interesting part. Nobody tells you where either train is actually going. Would you simply follow the crowd? Or would you first check the destination? That's exactly how investing works. Most people spend their lives choosing the busiest train. Very few spend time understanding the journey. And perhaps, that's the biggest lesson TBO Tek has taught us. Welcome back to Story Behind Stocks. Because every stock has a business, every business has a story. And every story hides an investment lesson waiting to be discovered. When this journey began, we asked a very simple question. Is TBO Tek just another travel company? 10 chapters later, we know the answer is much more interesting. It isn't simply selling hotel rooms. It isn't merely helping people book flights. It isn't competing to become the world's biggest airline. Instead, it is quietly building digital infrastructure for an industry that continues expanding every year. Imagine electricity inside a city. People don't celebrate the power lines. They celebrate the lights. They admire beautiful buildings, rarely the invisible wires hidden behind the walls. Yet remove those wires, and the city stops functioning. TBO's ambition appears remarkably similar, not becoming the traveler, but becoming part of the infrastructure that makes travel possible. That single difference changes how we should evaluate the business. Now let's bring everything together. Throughout this series, we've collected clues one by one. We never rushed toward a conclusion. Instead, we built conviction slowly, like assembling a giant mosaic. The industry showed us a long runway. The business model demonstrated scalability. Management revealed long-term thinking. Financial statements confirmed growth. Valuation reminded us not to confuse quality with cheapness. Technical behavior suggested improving market confidence. Independent evidence strengthened the overall picture. Psychology reminded us that our greatest opponent isn't the market. It's often ourselves. Now, all those pieces finally connect. So what exactly is the investment thesis? Imagine planting an orchard instead of buying fruit. When you buy fruit, you enjoy today's harvest. When you plant an orchard, you're investing in tomorrow's harvest. TBO appears to represent that second idea. The investment thesis isn't based on next quarter, or next month, or next week's stock price. It's based on the belief that global travel will continue becoming more digital, that travel businesses will increasingly depend on technology, that network effects will continue strengthening the platform, and that management will continue allocating capital intelligently enough to convert industry growth into shareholder value. Notice something. Every part of that thesis depends on execution, not hope. Execution. Now let's imagine the bull case. Suppose management continues delivering. Hotels and ancillary services become a larger share of business. International expansion succeeds. Technology keeps improving. Customer relationships deepen. The platform becomes more valuable as more participants join. Margins stabilize or gradually improve. Cash flow strengthens. Investor confidence remains high. In that world, today's premium valuation might eventually look reasonable. Not because the stock became cheaper, but because the business quietly grew into its valuation. History has rewarded companies that repeatedly exceeded expectations. The bull case isn't fantasy. It's a scenario built upon continued disciplined execution. But every coin has another side. Let's honestly discuss the bear case. Imagine climbing a mountain. The higher you climb, the narrower the path becomes. Small mistakes suddenly matter much more. That's exactly what happens when markets assign premium valuations. Suppose growth slows, not collapses, just slows. Suppose margins remain under pressure longer than expected. Suppose international expansion proves more expensive than planned. Suppose competition becomes more intense. Suppose cash conversion takes longer to recover. Suddenly, the market begins asking difficult questions. Remember, high expectations create high standards. A wonderful company can still become a disappointing investment if future performance falls short of the optimism already reflected in today's price. That's the bear case. Not that the business fails, but that expectations outrun reality. Now ask yourself another question. What could go right? Sometimes investors only think about risk. Let's balance the picture. Global travel continues expanding. Digital adoption accelerates. More travel agents migrate online. Cross-border travel becomes simpler. Hotels increasingly prefer technology-driven distribution. The company's international network deepens. Each new customer attracts more suppliers. Each supplier attracts more customers. The flywheel we've discussed throughout this series keeps turning. If that happens, TBO could strengthen its position over many years. Not overnight, patiently, like a tree adding another ring every season. Now, what could go wrong? Let's apply Charlie Munger's inversion again. Imagine trying to break the investment thesis. Travel demand weakens globally. Execution becomes inconsistent. Capital allocation disappoints. Acquisitions fail to integrate smoothly. Technology competitors innovate faster. Regulatory developments create uncertainty. Cash flow remains weaker than earnings suggest. The premium valuation leaves little room for mistakes. Notice something. Almost none of these risks involve one dramatic disaster. Most involve several small disappointments occurring together. Investing rarely goes wrong because of one giant mistake. It usually goes wrong because investors ignored several small warnings. Now comes perhaps the most important lesson of the entire documentary. Price is temporary. Business quality is cumulative. Imagine owning a magnificent orchard. Every morning, someone walks to your farm and shouts a different price. Some days, he's wildly optimistic. Other days, he's deeply pessimistic. Would the tree stop growing because the neighbor became emotional? Of course not. Businesses don't wake up every morning asking what their share price did yesterday. They wake up trying to serve customers, improve products, develop technology, hire better people, allocate capital. That's where long-term value is created. Stock prices eventually notice, but they usually arrive later. This brings us to one final mental model. The lighthouse. Imagine a lighthouse standing beside the ocean. Storms arrive. Ships change direction. Waves become violent. Fog appears. Years pass. The lighthouse doesn't chase ships. It simply keeps shining. Great businesses often behave similarly. Economic cycles change. Markets panic. Optimism returns. Valuations expand. Valuations contract. But disciplined management continues making thousands of sensible decisions. Eventually, those decisions become financial statements. Those financial statements become confidence. That confidence becomes long-term wealth creation. So, after everything we've learned, would I describe TBO Tek as a perfect investment? No. Perfect investments don't exist. Would I describe it as a perfect business? Again, no business is perfect. But would I describe it as one of the more interesting examples of a scalable, technology-driven platform operating within a structurally growing industry? Based on everything we've explored together, I believe that's a much fairer description. Because investing isn't about searching for perfection. It's about understanding probabilities and then patiently allowing time to do its work. Now let me leave you with 5 questions. Not for today's market, not even for TBO alone. For every investment you'll ever make. When you discover a company, ask yourself, if the stock market closed for 5 years, would I still be comfortable owning this business? Am I buying today's earnings or tomorrow's possibilities? Do I truly understand how this company creates value? Or am I simply repeating someone else's opinion? If this stock fell sharply tomorrow without any change in the business, would I see a problem or an opportunity? And finally, am I investing because I understand the story or because everyone else seems excited about it? If you honestly answer those 5 questions, you'll already be thinking differently from most market participants. Every story eventually reaches its final page. But investing never really does. Because the moment one company teaches you something, the next company asks you to apply that lesson. Perhaps that's the real purpose of this series. Not helping you remember TBO Tek. Helping you recognize great businesses wherever you find them. Because companies change, industries evolve, technology advances. But thoughtful investing remains timeless. This is Story Behind Stocks, where businesses become stories. Stories become wisdom, and wisdom helps build better investors. Before this journey ends, I'd like to leave one final thought with you. Stories are remembered not because they give us answers, but because they change the questions we ask. As you reflect on these 10 chapters, notice which chapter stayed with you the longest. Was it the business model, the psychology, the valuation, or perhaps the management story? And if there was a chapter where you felt another layer of insight was waiting beneath the surface, hold on to that thought. Because the next story we tell may begin exactly where this one left off.